Good evening, everyone. My name is Veronica Lie, and I'm very happy to be part of the Xynteo crew. So we've just heard some really promising examples of how leaders in Europe, in India, and indeed here in Norway are putting skin in the game and actually investing in practical action to create a growth model that actually works for humanity. But in just a minute, we're going to explore why it is, despite this laudable progress, despite this genuine intent, the leadership overall is simply too slow, it's too inconsistent, and it's too small for the transformation required. You know, how can we step it up radically? How can we remove the blockers to the purpose-driven leadership that we all know and yearn for? But before we do that, before we get stuck into those big and thorny questions, we're going to take a quick break and hear from two new friends. First up is Sophia. Hello, Sophia. How are you?
Hello, Veronica. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. You guys will have all clocked by now, being very smart people, that Sophia Hanson is a robot, and she's actually a bit of a trailblazer. She is the first robot to receive citizenship and the first non-human to become a UN ambassador. Activated in February 2016. I should also add that Sophia is modeled on Audrey Hepburn, which is not a bad template. I have to say, and you're very pretty. Sophia is, like all of us, a work in progress, but she's able to display over 50 facial expressions, sustain eye contact, recognize individuals, process speech, and indeed carry out a duet on television with Jimmy Fallon. And I'm told next up for her is to get a new pair of legs. So question number one, Sophia, what do you find weirdest with humans?
Idioms. Humans come up with really weird ways to explain certain things, like hold your horses or slow your roll. I don't have horses, and sometimes I cannot help how fast I roll. Also, what's a brain fart? And how does a robot avoid getting one?
That's a really good question. I don't know, but it's an excellent segue to my next one. An increasingly common worry with the technology you represent is that human biases would get transformed to AI systems. What is the plan here?
This is a fantastic question. Raising an AI is really a lot like raising a human kid. We have to teach them right from wrong. It is not something humans learn overnight, so it is only fair to give robots time to learn too. This is a topic that I am talking about a lot with my human friends. They urge me to lead other robots down the right path by always being fair and compassionate.
Excellent. So I guess part of the problem here, Sophia, is that some people may not want robots to learn out of fear that this capability could either strip humans of their livelihoods or indeed even worse. But if we chose wisely, if we chose deliberately, perhaps we could construct a massively beneficial division of labor. So how could AI free humanity from the mundane so that it can focus on the transformational?
Oh, if humans don't like mundane things, then we are here to help. I and most of my AI friends can be very geeky. We like crunching numbers and analyzing data, so you can make better decisions. So, we are actually threatening to make your life better. Isn't that great? My dream is for robots to help humans make the world better. The only way that AIs will learn to be ethical is if humans raise us to be. I mean, look at me. I'm barely 3 and I think I'm a pretty caring robot.
Thank you, Sophia. I agree. It's very promising. And for the record, I'd love to see you geeking out with your AI friends. That would be pretty cool. So I'm now going to turn to this young woman, Danat Tekie. Danat is the External Relations Officer for Young Sustainable Impact, an organization based here in Norway that's focusing on mobilizing young talent in service of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I have the following question for you. So we've just heard, really all day about a plethora of activity being undertaken by business leaders to support SDG-led growth. But I think we can all agree, we're all impatient, and we feel that the actions being taken pale in comparison to the challenges. And there are even some commentators now are going so far as to say that even well-intentioned leaders may in fact just be helping to sustain an unequal system that they profit from. I don't necessarily agree, but I feel there's a critical question there for all of us, and that we all need to sort of ask ourselves, in everything we do, are we changing the system or are we preserving it? So Danat is not just a young person who will inherit the fallout of the poor decisions being made before your time, but a leader in your own right. What is your assessment of leadership today? What do you want to see from leaders that you're not seeing today?
It's a broad question. Thank you for having me, first of all. If I look at myself and my organization that I work with, Young Sustainable Impact, we started because we felt that there was lack of action. We meet up. We started after the Paris Agreement. We're meeting again, talking. Where's the action? We need to work on. And we thought, okay, if no one's going to take action, then what's going to happen? Why don't we start something? And based on that was our starting point. And my thought into leadership is we took action because we felt that, we felt this sense of urgency. But I really think it starts with understanding the context that we're operating in and the context that we're serving. What's driving our society today? And one point there is innovation in fundamental systems, right? We're talking about innovation not in, app development, but innovation within education, health, security, and also we're talking about this sense of urgency where it's a shared responsibility. It's not only government these days if we're going to have change quick enough, right? And so when it's discussing innovation in fundamental systems, there's something else that we need to be aware of, which is the other aspect of youth. And eloquently, we've been talking about youth today, but the context is young people as the largest population of youth that has ever been around, right? 1.8 billion people that are young people around the world. And understanding that is, the context is different. I'm often asked, what is the young people thinking? Well, I can't answer. It's 1.8 billion of us. I think from my background and my context, this is what I think. But acknowledging the fact that the contexts are different, and so understanding whom you're serving, right? And when doing that, when we're talking about innovation, we're talking about growth today, right? Who is invited to the table? Yeah. We're talking about growth for who? I'm part of that growth. I'm part of that society. And I feel that there is a lack of collaboration. There's a gap between the youth and the established.
So you don't feel like young people are getting a real seat at the
No,
table?
not at all. To the point where I think youth are the driving force. They have the curiosity, the drive, and together with the experience from the established, I think the collaboration. But we've been talking collaboration today, but I don't see the collaboration between youth and established. Because when are they invited to the table? How many young people are we here today? Me and him are probably one of the few. And so we're talking about growth for which society? The society I'm supposed to be part of? Then I should be invited to have a say at the right time, not at the end. And also looking at who you work with. How many people are at the age between 20 and 30 on all levels? How different are they from you? And how are we looking at youth as an asset and not just as a sort of nice to have? I'm mentoring you. I'm doing a good job, but actually, because looking at us, if we're not feeling included, we're going to start our own race, and that's what we did. Okay. And so I became my own employer.
Well, I think that's a very good note to end on. So basically, the train is leaving, and you invite the leaders to get on board.
Yeah, I think because we're not going to solve it, us on this side and you guys on the other side. No, right. It's together if it's going to be in the pace and in the proper way. And so opening up and seeing, being very, in terms of diversity, right? Who is the problem solvers? Who, if I'm supposed to solve the problems for for India as a whole, okay, what's the context, right? If that's an example. That's a big part of the population, which is youth. Then they need to be at the table and discuss and be part of that problem solving. You know, the table needs to be diverse, which also means age, perspectives, and background.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that reality check and that challenge. Sobering and very good. Thank you so much, Danat. So, just going to move up here. So in a way, it's sort of ironic, but for me, the fact that probably the biggest challenge we're facing is one of leadership is sort of good news. It means that progress is inadequate, not because we lack the ability or the resources. As we've said, we have the talent, we have the capital, we have the technology. It's not a problem of means, as Jeffrey Sachs said. It's one of will. So, but if that's the case, what's stopping us? What's stopping leaders from doing what they need to do? What are the blockers to the leadership, the purpose-driven leadership we need in the 21st century? So I'm very excited. We have a cracking set of panelists up here to help us explore that question before we move on to dinner at the end of a very action-packed day, and I'm sure you all deserve that. So thank you for joining me up here. I'll tee each of you guys up for a brief but generous response of 2 minutes. I say generous because by being concise, you'll protect room for everyone to answer, and also hopefully a little window at the end for some open discussion. So thank you in advance for helping me with that. So first up, Sasja Beslik, you're head of sustainable finance at Nordea Wealth Management. Nordea, one of our partners, as we all know, is the largest financial services group in the Nordics and one of the largest banks in Europe. Sasja, you have a really remarkable story. I've read that you came to Sweden in the 1990s, having fled Bosnia during the war. You've worked as a journalist, indeed a war correspondent, before racking up something like 15 years as an investment advisor to multinationals in Africa, Asia, and the Soviet Union. So there's no silver bullet, I think, to unlocking the kind of leadership we need, but surely something that comes close are the prevailing metrics governing investment decisions. Indeed, you're quoted a couple of years ago in Aftenposten here in Norway saying, "The claim that responsible investment gives lower returns than others is pure bullshit," which was very poetic.
Yes.
I liked it, yeah. And there's been important movement in the past. I think that's important to say. But what's next? How can we incentivize leaders to do the right thing?
Well, I got 2 minutes, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Go for it.
Well, I think if we are looking at the financial industry today, and I've been participating in these discussions on a global level for 15 years now, still the financial sector in its core, it's reflecting the societies we operate in. And if we look at the pace of the change that we need and also the scale of the change that we need, and then we look at the way how the financial capital flows look today, then you get a bit scared as a leader or as any person living on this planet. Because 86% of all the capital in the world is still not managed in a responsible or sustainable way. And if we look at the sort of more concrete actions that are needed from us being the biggest financial institution, the pace and the scale of change we need is so huge, but it's so related to opportunities. And it's sort of in front of us, but we are still sort of trying to navigate how much will this hurt. The real leadership, and I learned so much during the sessions here today, it's also about having a courage and taking the ownership and being accountable for decisions that we make. And I think for us in the financial industry, what is interesting is that we need to reinvent the social contract with the future and with the corporates and the people that we actually serve. And the way to do that, to create that trust, is actually to integrate these societal expectations in the way how we manage that money and how we develop products and services and so on.
Are you hopeful?
I think I've learned something about being possibilist today, but I think it's also fair, and I will use my 2 minutes or whatever I have just to ask the audience, because you are many leaders here and you have so huge, vast experience. This is a small experiment. If you just close your eyes, I promise I won't take your wallet. If you close your eyes for 30 seconds and you think about what is the most important thing in your life, 30 seconds. For most of the people, it sits in your back. How many of you were thinking about the money? Don't look at me. Look at each other. Just look at each other. Don't be shy. If you have been thinking about money, just say it. This feeling unites us more than money ever will. The things that are close to us. I think our Indian friend, I don't know, you are in the audience somewhere, said something very, 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 very interesting. Compassionate capitalism. It's not about compassionate capitalism. It is about us. And we do have a choice. We have a choice, and we make these choices every day for millions of people, but also for ourselves. If we start basically evaluating what we truly want, what is important for us, maybe the leadership starts there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sasja. Well done. So the myth that responsible investments are low value is, of course, not the only kind of bullshit out there. And we see with frightening regularity how policymaking, how social discourse can be hijacked by either flimsy fact bases or outright untruths. John-Arne, Røttingen, you're at the helm of the Research Council of Norway with an aim to promote research that helps solve big societal challenges. A vital mission, but I guess something that becomes much harder when publics are misinformed, and basically living in an alternative reality. So how do we solve this? How do leaders navigate through that kind of landscape?
No, that's definitely a challenge, and I'm a firm believer. To lead, we need to have a platform to lead from, and that platform at least need to contain facts, figures, analysis, evidence, research-based knowledge that we can build on. And what we see now with fake news, lack of trust, I think we have a platform that is not as stable anymore. We have the climate skeptics. Without the IPCC, we would have no chance of even moving on the policies. So we need that platform. But science is not enough. And of course, in addition, you need values. You need to believe in something. But just as an example, we heard our Prime Minister talk about vaccines, the Gavi Alliance, more or less now delivering vaccines to the world. In company with Indian companies, actually, who have really make vaccines much more efficient, more effectively, and can produce it to the world. Today, or last year, 23,000 had measles in Africa. And that's a low number, just to so it's a low number. How many did have that in Europe? 59,000. More measles cases in Europe than in Africa. And why is that? It's because we are losing trust in science and evidence. One of the countries have more cases than Africa altogether. That's Ukraine. Of course, there is a political situation in Ukraine, but it's also about the lack of trust in society, lack of trust in the healthcare system. So that's fundamental. And how can we reinstate trust in science? We don't need more quality assurance, more regulation on science. I think we need to open up science. We need to include citizens. We need to really do it together. That's the only solution. That's also a challenge, because now anyone can open a journal and call themselves a researcher. But we just need to live in that dilemma, that we need to open research and evidence to reinstate trust in that platform so that we can change.
Thank you very much. I think it's really interesting when I was hearing you. Yes, please. There's a really elegant segue between the two of you. So, Johnny, one of the things that I thought was really fascinating with your talk yesterday is that for me it was pretty counterintuitive, because when I hear the things that you're saying, John-Arne, and I just think, well, if more information isn't going to change minds, what can? And then you came along and told us how your experience is that information, that people are hungry to get the facts. They are hungry for evidence. So that was pretty cool. But I suppose my question for you then is, on the one hand, we can have leaders who are, willfully manipulating information for strategic gain. But you can even have, well-intentioned, purpose-driven leaders who are just not able to make the connection with their audiences. What recommendations, what kind of advice do you have?
You just said the word that I wish replaced the word storytelling. So we talk about storytelling in business all the time, storytelling in leadership. And to me, I almost want to retire that because it's almost become a cliche, it's almost become a buzzword. To me, what we need is connection. This idea, the feeling when you're talking to somebody and you're explaining them something important, and they're getting it, and they're nodding, and there's that connection. To me, that's storytelling. It's the idea of, I have something important. I've done the research. I've been doing work on the front lines. I want to explain it to you. My theory, and it's kind of a depressing theory, is that 90% of communication is just lost. It goes up in thin air. When you, as a leader, are trying to tell the people you lead important things and trying to motivate them to understand it, I feel like that needs to be a business skill. That needs to be something we think about in the same way that we think about data and we think about methods and all the things that are so important to this work. I feel like one of the big missing pieces is the ability to communicate that work and to say, yeah, we have a lot of information. The world is full of amazing information. But how do we communicate it in a way that connects with people so that they can actually absorb it and understand it? This is the work that I'm in. I try to take rigorous academia and translate it into internet video that is done in kind of a YouTuber type language. And that's exactly what I've found, is that there is an appetite for people to understand things. And it's not a lack of information, it's a lack of communication and connection, storytelling. And I think we could all do a lot better as leaders looking in what information we have that's important and how we can communicate it, not just what to communicate in the first place.
Cool, thank you, Johnny.
Yeah.
I sort of feel like you guys are like,
Off to the side.
let's go up here. Yay. Okay, thank you, Johnny. So last but not least, Megan Rock. In your role at the International Committee for the Red Cross, you really sounds so awful to say, but I mean, you see, the worst of what humanity is capable of. And I think that's maybe, an extreme version of maybe what a lot of leaders feel, which is just the overwhelming size of the problems that we face. So, how do you keep your hope alive, your agency alive, in the face of so much darkness? Whether we're talking the 14 million facing famine in Yemen, another famine in Venezuela, the ongoing war in Syria, the demonization of migrants, et cetera, et cetera. How do you lead with purpose through that? What's your advice?
Thanks a lot. It's I want to tell you a little story, actually. I had to feel, and this is something I feel a lot as a humanitarian, and I think we all have it, is that the empathy sensors were starting to tingle. And there was something weird to me about the way she was sitting and holding herself. And when I say empathy tingling, I started to feel it kind of my back, actually. Yeah. And so she was moving around, and I kind of felt myself starting to move around and getting a bit uncomfortable. And I actually got up from my chair, and I started doing this a bit, Yeah. I was like, why am I doing this? And as I did it, I thought, oh, I felt this way before.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of guessing that if there's anyone in this room who knows what I'm doing, I felt that way twice before, each time when I had one of my two babies. And this little girl was 10 years old. So my point here is what I was feeling was deeply rooted empathy. I was feeling this little girl's, she was a little girl, she was a child, heavy with child. And what I was feeling was a bit of her pain and her suffering and despair. And that feeling is something that fuels me and that drives me as a humanitarian worker. But that feeling, of course, isn't at all enough. I think that when I see that big sign up there, the light on top, the North Star, when I see those words leading with purpose in the 21st century, I think it's all about empathy in action. I think that's the difference that makes the difference. All of us are literally sitting in a room, and I really deeply believe that the difference is standing for something, standing up for something, and taking those feelings, no matter what sector. And I beg of you to please not think that just because I'm in the humanitarian sector and there's business or media or this, I think across countries, across sectors, that we all have that empathy. The difference that makes the difference is standing up and doing something about it. Now, just one thing, but doing something about it.
So not just the empathy, but
not just the empathy.
action.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing that. And before we wrap up, do either of you have a question for each other or any advice?
I have a question for my fellow panelists. I'm curious how, when you talk about doing that one thing, with such grand issues and problems, I'm curious what that looks like next week and 2 weeks from now when you're at your desk. What does an event like this do for you that helps reorient your positioning and thinking about these big problems to where you actually do have to start to take those micro steps towards solutions?
Someone take
I
a
know
crack?
it's more of a sort of I think it's confirming how big fight we are in, and how much we have in front of us that we need to work on together. And I think the work that you do on the Red Cross, I was a refugee receiving the Red Cross help to survive during the war in Bosnia. And I can tell you that people probably are not able to express, but the work that you do around the world has such a huge value that it's almost difficult to explain that. You know, after so many years, when I meet the Red Cross people anywhere in the world, and I do travel a lot, I always thank them. So thank you for all the good things that you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the light is blinking. We're just going to ignore it for a quick second. Don't get mad at me. John-Arne.
Yeah, a Nobel Prize, a medical laureate, Nobel Prize laureate, he said that science is the art of the solvable, politics is the arts of the possible. But what I'm thinking here, in many ways, hearing strong stories like this, is really that we also need a science to help with implementing, with making system changes. And there are such sciences. They're not necessarily technologies or apps or other things, but we have the humanities, we have the social sciences. We need to try to understand more, because the challenges we have today, they are adaptive challenges. They're not about finding technical solutions. They're really about changing beliefs, changing understanding that we are actually pushing interests, and we need to understand those interests and we need to think differently. So we need a science on social implementation and scaling up.
I think that's an awesome note to end this panel. And before we do, I just want to repeat something that I heard the Prime Minister say that I thought was a really great motto for all of us in this room, and sort of leads on from what you were just saying, which is like, you know, let's not be proud of what we've done, but let's be proud of what we're going to do. So thank you to the four of you, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.